My family favored my sister by taking her on a trip while leaving me behind. One day, a stranger approached me and handed me $50,000, revealing that she was actually our biological mother. My sister, Alex, thought about it for a few minutes before deciding that she wanted to use the money to take two of her friends to Hawaii as a gift. Without hesitation, my parents agreed. Overjoyed, Alex rushed to her room to celebrate and inform her friends. While she was in her room, I asked my parents if I would be going with them. I wasn't sure because usually when we went on family vacations, they took me along. But since this trip was a gift for Alex, I didn't know if I was included or even welcome. She doesn't like me much, and honestly, I don't like her either. Even though we are twins, we are nothing alike. She is spoiled, arrogant, and rude to everyone. Nobody from our school liked her. Her group of friends seemed to admire her, but I always felt it was because they were just like her. When I asked my parents if I would be joining them, they hesitated and took a moment to think. Right then, I knew the answer would be no. If they had to think about it, it clearly wasn't because they wanted to take me, it was because they were trying to figure out how to tell me I wasn't going. After a few seconds, my mother spoke. She told me that even though this was a gift for Alex, it would be cruel to bring me along because that would make it a family trip. I pointed out the obvious, that my parents were still going, but they insisted that they were only joining because Alex wanted them there. They were certain that she wouldn't want me there, as they knew we didn't get along. After hearing that, I had nothing else to say. I simply returned to my room. I felt horrible for myself. While I hadn't achieved much academically, I believed that earning a football scholarship was worth celebrating too. But my parents didn't seem to care about me or my accomplishments. To make matters worse, they had no problem leaving me home alone for an entire week while they took Alex to Hawaii to celebrate with her friends. I was miserable for a whole day, until I realized that with my family gone for a week, I would have the house to myself. That meant I could do whatever I wanted, which made me feel a little better. I decided to make the best of the situation. As my family prepared for their trip, it felt like they had completely forgotten about me. It wasn't something I was used to, and it hurt. On the day they left, my parents at least told me to take care of the house and said goodbye. But my sister didn't even look at me. She just laughed. This was typical behavior from her, which only shows how bad our relationship really was. For the first few days, I invited my friends over. We played video games, ate junk food, and did whatever we wanted from morning until night. Once they had to leave, I repeated the same plan the next day. On the final day, I intended to call my friends again and let them know they could come over. However, at around 8 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was way too early for my friends to be arriving, and I wasn't even fully awake, since I had been sleeping in late ever since graduating high school. I went downstairs and peeked through the window to see who it was. To my shock, it looked like my mother standing there. It took me a few moments to remember that my mother wasn't home. She was in Hawaii with the rest of the family. This had to be someone else. Then I noticed the differences. The woman at the door was taller than my mother, looked younger, and had blonde highlights in her hair, something my mother despised. That's when I realized this wasn't my mother, but someone who looked eerily similar to her. After thinking about it for a moment, I decided to open the door. If she resembled my mother so much, she had to be a relative. She introduced herself as my mother's cousin and explained that she had been living in the United Kingdom for the past 20 years, which is why I had never seen her before. From what I knew, my mother had no siblings. She was an only child. This woman appeared only a few years younger than my mother, so being her cousin was possible, but it still felt odd. I had never once heard my mother mention a cousin from the UK. Then again, I didn't talk to my mother very often. I let her in, but immediately told her that my parents weren't home since I assumed she had come to see them. To my surprise, she said that was fine. She wasn't here for them. She had actually come to see me and my sister. That was unexpected. I couldn't understand why she wanted to meet us. I explained that I was home alone while my sister was in Hawaii. Her expression immediately changed. She looked disappointed and asked where the rest of my family was. Her face seemed trustworthy, so I decided to be honest with her. I told her the truth. Like most people, she was shocked to learn that my family had left me behind while taking my sister to Hawaii to celebrate her graduation, even though I had graduated at the same time. I tried to act like it didn't bother me much because I didn't want her to think I was complaining. I also didn't want my mother scolding me later for telling her cousin about our family. She apologized and said she understood how I felt. Then, unexpectedly, she offered me a gift. She pulled out her checkbook, wrote me a check, and told me to fill in the amount myself. I was stunned. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. I told her I couldn't accept it. I couldn't take money from her. We went back and forth for a few minutes until she insisted on writing in the amount herself. She handed me a check for $50,000. I was speechless. I told her I couldn't possibly accept such a huge amount. It was an unimaginable sum for me. But she wouldn't take no for an answer. In the end, I had no choice but to accept it. She said it was the least she could do for me. That sentence stuck with me. I didn't know what she meant by it, but I still think about it. After that, we talked about my family and how everyone was doing, but I could tell she wasn't really paying attention. She seemed distracted. About half an hour later, she told me she had to leave but hoped to see me again soon. Once she was gone, I realized how strange the whole encounter had been. Her behavior had been unusual, and something didn't sit right with me. I also couldn't shake the feeling that she had lied about being my mother's cousin. Cousins don't usually look that much alike, though in some cases they might. But deep down, I had a strong suspicion that my mother actually had a sister that none of us knew about. Maybe that's why she had lied and claimed to be a cousin. I know it sounds crazy, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but she was just too similar to my mother. I could feel it. And here's where I made a mistake. I was so caught up in that strange encounter that I completely forgot about the check. I left the check on the coffee table, buried under a stack of letters my parents had received that week. Then my friends came over, and we had a small party with a few others. I completely forgot about the check. The next morning, my family returned from Hawaii. Everyone was in a great mood, except for me, of course. A few minutes after they got home, my parents began sorting through their mail. That's when they discovered the check near the bottom of the pile. I was lucky enough to be standing right there and managed to snatch it from my father's hands the moment he noticed it. But it was too late. He had already seen that it was a check made out to me and immediately started asking questions. I didn't blame him. If someone wrote your son a check for $50,000, you'd want to know why. Since they had already seen it, I figured there was no point in hiding anything. I told them about the woman who had visited, our conversation, and how she had written me the check just because she wanted to. I also mentioned that I planned to deposit it soon. That's when something really strange happened. As I spoke, I noticed my parents' expressions change. They looked afraid. I'm not exaggerating when I say that the color literally drained from their faces. Just moments ago, they had returned from Hawaii, looking tanned and relaxed, and now they were suddenly pale and sweating. I was about to ask my mother who this cousin from the UK really was, because I knew they were hiding something from us. But before I could say anything, my brat of a sister decided to hijack the conversation. She couldn't stand it when something wasn't about her, so of course, she chose that exact moment to start complaining about how the check was made out only to me. She whined that I should have asked our aunt to make it out to both of us instead. I told her that the woman was aware of both of us and had deliberately addressed the check to me. I turned back to my father, determined to get back to the real issue. But suddenly, all three of them, my parents and Alex, started focusing on the check instead. It was obvious they were trying to change the subject, and it worked. My parents encouraged my sister to argue with me, and she took the bait, as always. Alex started shouting at me, claiming it was completely unfair and that I had to split the money with her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her there was no way that was happening. She had already gotten her gift, a trip to Hawaii with her friends, exactly what she had wanted. This check was my gift. I had no obligation to share it, just like she had no obligation to share her vacation with me. I thought that was a pretty reasonable argument. But my parents immediately took her side. They backed her up, saying that since my aunt had come to visit both of us, she must have meant for the money to be shared. Then they accused me of manipulating the situation. They claimed I must have played the victim in front of her, made myself seem pitiful so she would give me the check out of sympathy, making the rest of my family look like villains. And of course, Alex believed them. But here's the thing, I didn't have to play the victim. I was the victim. I was the one who had been left behind while my entire family celebrated our graduation without me. And whether the woman gave me the check out of sympathy or not, the fact remained. It was written to me. There was no reason I should have to share it. Obviously, this led to a huge argument. My parents kept feeding Alex's entitlement, making her believe she deserved the money. Maybe she wasn't as sharp as I was, but I could see what was really happening. They were just trying to distract us from the real issue, our so-called aunt. And that made me furious. They were willing to pit us against each other just to avoid answering my questions. Then my mother crossed the line. She threatened me. She said that if I refused to split the money with Alex, I would no longer be allowed to live in their house. That was it. I snapped. I started yelling at the top of my lungs, something I usually never do, because I don't want to stoop to their level. But this time, I couldn't help it. I told them I knew my rights, and I wasn't going anywhere. And I definitely wasn't sharing the money. To be honest, I don't even know if there are any actual laws protecting me in this situation, but after my outburst, I'm pretty sure they won't be trying anything anytime soon. Before storming off to my room, I called my parents liars. Because I knew they were hiding something from us. And I couldn't believe they had intentionally provoked a fight just to make us forget about the visitor. Up in my room, I threw things around, trying to calm down. Eventually, I managed to get myself under control. Since then, no one in the house has spoken to me. Not even during meal times. My mother just leaves food at my door, without saying a word. I feel like a prisoner in my own home. Last night, I even thought about running away. The only person who has spoken to me is Alex. But, of course, it wasn't out of concern. This morning, she came into my room and said, "All of this could have been avoided if you had just split the money with me and stopped bothering our parents about our aunt." She told me it was obvious that they didn't want to talk about it, and now I only had myself to blame for making things worse. Then she laughed. At that moment, I realized she was the most selfish person I had ever met. But then, I started thinking, what if I was being selfish too? $50,000 is a lot of money. Would it really hurt me to split it with her? Or was I just being greedy? I may have overanalyzed the situation with my aunt. But my parents' reaction was too suspicious to ignore. Right now, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I have so many conflicting emotions that I don't even know what I'm upset about anymore. So I really have to ask, was there anything odd about my parents' reaction to learning that my aunt would be visiting? And more importantly, am I wrong for refusing to share the $50,000 with my sister? Hello, everyone. First and foremost, thank you for all your reactions and comments on my post. Never in my life did I expect so many people to take the time to offer me advice on a situation like this. It means a lot to know that others understand what I'm going through. So, again, thank you. I realize my original post was a bit scattered, but that was because of the situation I was in. This time, I'll try to keep things short and to the point. I've decided to leave my parents' house. I gave it some serious thought, and honestly, this is what they want. And it's what I want too. I never moved out before because I thought it would be too much to handle, but after everything that's happened, I realized that staying here makes no sense. I have never gotten along with my parents or my sister. And after what they pulled, I see no reason to stay. So, I've decided to move in with a friend until college starts. Something really strange happened before I left. When I first described the visitor who had come while they were gone, my parents turned completely white. And now, Alex is having a full-on meltdown. I have no idea why, but something about that woman terrifies them. Anyway, my friend's parents have been incredibly kind. Even though I offered to pay rent, they insisted I could stay for free. So, bottom line, I'm leaving. And yes, I'm keeping all the money. The check was written out to me, and only me. I am not obligated to share it with anyone, least of all my sister. If my parents hadn't left me home alone while they went on vacation, I probably wouldn't have even met my aunt, let alone received so much money. So, in a way, they're responsible for this. She has never treated me with kindness or respect. And yet, she expects me to just hand over half of this money? It's ridiculous. My parents will always take care of her. I, on the other hand, can't say the same for myself. I need this money far more than she does. I'm not sure why I ever thought about splitting it with her or why I questioned if I was doing the right thing. Maybe I was just too emotional. But now that I've had time to think about it, I realize I don't need to feel bad. They never have. And honestly, it's perfectly acceptable for me to start acting like them. It's been 3 days since my last post. I've spent that time packing up all my things. Tomorrow afternoon, my friend's dad is coming with his pickup truck and I'll be leaving. I can't wait. When the time came to leave, my parents watched as I packed up my things. But they didn't say a word. They didn't even ask any questions. Alex didn't bother to come out of her room, except for one brief moment. She peeked out, saw what was happening, then went back inside without a word. I was prepared to walk out the door without saying goodbye, because why should I? No one here cares about me. But just as I was about to leave, my mother suddenly stopped me. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked. I looked at her a little stunned. For days, they had all ignored me, acting like I didn't exist. Now, all of a sudden, she cared? I told her exactly that. I said, "You've all been pretending I don't exist for days. Now, you don't have to pretend anymore. I'm moving out, and you can forget about me for real." It shouldn't have surprised her. She was the one who said I couldn't live here anymore if I didn't share the money with Alex. I simply took her words seriously and left before she could throw me out. My parents warned me that I was being silly and arrogant, that I'd come crawling back once I realized that $50,000 wouldn't be enough to survive on my own. I didn't respond. I just turned around and walked away. And they didn't try to stop me. Interestingly, my friend's father was far more empathetic than my own parents. The whole ride to their house, he kept reassuring me that everything was going to be okay. When we arrived, they set me up in the guest room, which has been my home ever since. My friend's family is amazing. My friend himself is a natural comedian, and his whole family is just so kind and welcoming. Staying with them has opened my eyes to something I never thought about before. This is what a real family looks like. This is what love and support actually feel like. And for the first time in my life, I feel safe. But that's not even the biggest thing that happened. In the last few days, I finally learned who the mystery woman was. And honestly, I'm still struggling to process it. Remember how I said she looked strikingly similar to my mother? Well, I had a suspicion she might be a long-lost relative, maybe even a secret sister. And last night, she confirmed it. She reached out to me on social media and told me everything. And let me just say, I wasn't ready for what she had to say. She is my mother's youngest sister, my biological aunt. But she was kicked out of the family when she became pregnant while in college. And guess what? Her children are us. Yes, Alex and I are actually her children. At the time, my biological mother was only 19 years old and still in college. Her parents, our grandparents, forced her to put us up for adoption. Coincidentally, around the same time, my parents had been trying to have a baby, but were struggling to conceive. So, after a family discussion, my mother chose to adopt us. But there was a catch. My parents only wanted to adopt one child. And that child had to be a girl. But my biological mother refused to separate us. She stood her ground and said, "If you're adopting my children, you're taking both of them." Eventually, my grandparents convinced my parents to adopt us both. And that's how Alex and I were raised, by the people we've always believed were our real parents. For the first few months after the adoption, my biological mother visited frequently. But eventually, my mom had enough. She told my grandparents that she wanted her sister to stop coming around. Her reasoning? She claimed that having two maternal figures would be too confusing for us. She said she'd let her back into our lives when she was ready, but until then, she needed to stay away. And my grandparents agreed. This led to a huge argument. As a result, my biological mother cut off contact with the family for several years. Earlier this year, she finally reconnected with our grandparents. And they, perhaps feeling guilty, gave her our address. Since Alex and I are now 18, she thought it was the perfect time to try to reconnect with us and eventually tell us the truth. But after meeting me, After seeing how I was treated by my family, she realized she had made a huge mistake. She now sees that my mother only wanted Alex, not me. She adopted both of us, but she only ever truly accepted Alex. She feels responsible for what happened to me. That's why she reached out, because she knew no one else would ever tell me the truth. It's been hours since I read her message, and I still don't know how to process it. I haven't told anyone, not even the friend I'm living with. Typing this out has helped me say it out loud at least once. But beyond that, I'm completely numb, puzzled, lost. I know I'll have to do something with this information eventually, but right now I have no idea what. Hey, everyone. It's been 2 weeks since I got that message. To be honest, I still don't know what to call her. She introduced herself as my aunt, but suddenly, she's my mother. And the truth is, she already feels like a better mother than the one who raised me. I took my sweet time responding. I only texted her back 3 days ago. I told her that we had a lot to talk about and that I would rather meet in person. But most importantly, I said I was willing to have a relationship with her. I already lost the family I thought I had. So, what harm could it do to give her another chance? She was only 19 when she made that mistake. I can't hold that against her forever. I don't think it's my place to tell her. This is something our mother needs to do herself. And honestly, I don't even know which mother I'm talking about anymore. But all I know is, in a few days, I'll be meeting my biological mother. She's back for good, and this time, she's not going anywhere. For the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. I really hope everything goes well. Fingers crossed.